Across the history of hip-hop, chemistry between two standout artists has created no shortage of greatness. From OG duos like Eric B and Rakim, or Timbaland and Justin Timberlake, through to recent duos like Kanye and Hov, or Metro Boomin and 21, hitting that sweet spot between a producer and a rapper is like finding gold. And as many have figured out, you can't force that magic to happen, even if you happen to be considered one of the greatest rappers of all time, or one of the greatest musical visionaries the culture has ever seen. Within their respective fields of rapping and production, each man is seen as playing a crucial role in pushing hip-hop towards mainstream dominance. In Rick Rubin's case, the 1984 hit It's Yours that he produced for T-La Rock and Jazzy J was the seed for the creation of Def Jam Records when a young Russell Simmons went on a quest to uncover who produced it. From there, he'd go on to not only found one of the leading rap labels in history, but work with a slew of other iconic artists once he left Def Jam. While in M's case, he's quite simply the most successful rapper of all time, and a household name in pretty much any corner of the world. Considering the prestige and track record both men have, the two pairing up should have resulted in magic, but when this duo linked up for two projects across 2014 and 2017, it resulted in the most lackluster music of M's entire discography and a major blotch on Rubin's track record. But before we get there, let's take a look at why Eminem would have sought out the services of Rubin in the first place. In essence, Rubin is a visionary in hip-hop, revolutionizing how hip-hop records sound by aiming to replicate the sound that resonated with him back during his days at NYU. Up until the creation of Def Jam, pretty much most of the rap songs at the time were R&B records with people rapping on them, he told NPR. One of the things that separated our records from the rest was that they had more to do with what the actual culture was like, and that was only because we came as fans from this culture. The goal was to capture the energy that you felt at a hip-hop club, and they weren't really clubs then. They were more like hip-hop night at another club. So if you went out and you saw DJs and MCs and the energy on that one night, that was really what we tried to put into our records. Bringing that raw, percussive sound of the streets to the studio, Rick, Russell Simmons, and Def Jam would be instrumental in creating what we now know as commercial hip-hop through their work with LL Cool J, Run DMC, Public Enemy, and the Beastie Boys, among others. Where Russell handled the business side of things, Rick was the man who helped to sculpt the sound in his unique vision. Blessed with an understanding of what elevates a song into a near spiritual experience, Rick is an interesting case in that he isn't even a musician or a beat maker. Prolific in rock music as he is in rap, supergroup Guns N' Roses and Stone Temple Pilots once explained the process of Rubin and how it drastically differs from your average producer. You just write a bunch of you record it, he listens to it, and he goes, "Oh, that thing's good. Why don't you work on that some more?" When he thinks you're ready, he'll say, "Alright, let's make a record." As a result, people often wonder exactly how the supposed Midas touch of Rick Rubin manifests, as, in his own words, he's incredibly limited in terms of actually knowing how to play an instrument or construct a song from scratch.
Do you know how to work a soundboard?
No, I have no technical ability, and I know nothing about music.
You must know something.
Well, I know what I like and what I don't like, and I'm decisive about what I like and what I don't like.
Paid for what he termed as a confidence and ability to express what he feels, this method clearly works in certain circumstances when Rubin feels energized by what he's hearing. For example, just look at how casually he gave Jay-Z a note that'd go on to shape one of his biggest hits of all time.
I'm thinking maybe we start a cappella with, "If you're having girl problems, I feel bad for your son. I got 99 problems, but they one hit me." Right into the first verse.
I got the best money. All these records I used to listen to, these guys are the creators of it, the architects of what we do right now. I'm just fortunate, man.
Never once accused of being a vulture like other white execs in hip-hop, it's clear that Rubin has an immense respect for the culture and is every bit as excited to work with artists as they are to have him on board. And once again, the Black Album sessions, which spawned 99 Problems, shows us exactly how awestruck he is by watching a mastermind in full flow.
Just to see the way he writes, I've never seen anything like it. He hasn't written anything down. He just kind of sits there, listens to the track, writes a verse, and then goes and does it.
In the words of Chuck D, what Rick does isn't tangible in the way that what the Bomb Squad did for P.E. was. But it was no less important in getting them to realize their potential. On other occasions, Rick is just the man you come to when you need help finding your direction. This, in a nutshell, is what he did for Kanye and how he molded the sound of Yeezus.
And he came over and listened to probably 3.5 hours of works in progress. It was like really a rough sketch. These are cool things, but it's a long ways off, and assuming the record will come out next year. He's like, "Oh, well, it's coming out in 5 weeks." And I said, "I have a record coming out in November that's a lot further along than this." He's like, "Please help me. Would you be open to fixing it and shaping it and finishing it off?" Yeah. I was panicked the whole time. He wasn't at all.
So when news surfaced that M and Rick Rubin will be linking up, it seemed like a match made in heaven. When the first snippets of their music leaked, it seemed that Rick had augmented the sound that M found on tracks like Sing for the Moment, Beautiful, and to a lesser extent, White America from M's earlier music. In essence, he dove into a lane he'd first showcased with Beastie Boys, No Sleep Till Brooklyn, and leaned in on guitar-driven samples to give the tracks an extra punch. This was the philosophy that gave us the first track that surfaced from the Marshall Mathers LP 2, and on the set of the music video, Rubin explained how we got there and what their intention was.
I had met Paul, M's manager, a few years ago, and we always talked about the possibility of getting together to work on something at some point down the road. I think it's unlike any current hip-hop songs. If you listen to what's going on in hip-hop, this is not what this is. We were in the studio working on a bunch of different ideas, and this was one of the later ones to come up. It started with a sample, and the sample that we started with ended up not being in the record. It started one way, it kind of got programmed and written to, and then it changed into a whole different song. I felt the track was really strong.
Well, as enthused as Rick sounded about it, there might have been good reason as to why it sounded like nothing that came out. While the initial response to the Marshall Mathers LP 2 mainly focused on M's lyrical ability he'd maintained into his 40s, the criticism generally landed on Rubin's production and how he contributed to the lows of the album. Marshall Mathers LP 2 is the most confusing collection of beats of the year, wrote the line of Best Fit. Rhyme or Reason awkwardly rides the Zombies' Time of the Season. So far, chops up Joe Walsh's Life's Been Good into second-rate Mikey Clark, and Berserk is an everything in the kitchen sink boom bap mess of Beastie Boys and Billy Squier samples. The worst part is that the supposed guru Rick Rubin had a hand in all three. Billed as an exceptional MC who doesn't have much of anything interesting to say over questionable production, it was clear that Rick hadn't managed to provide the guidance that Shady desperately needed at the time, nor could he gel with M as he had with the likes of Dr. Dre. As for why the Rubin method didn't click for Shady, it might have something to do with the fact that he takes the polar opposite approach to Dr. Dre. In the countless interviews that have emerged in which collaborators break down Dre's approach to production, he's painted as nothing less than a perfectionist. A man who was in a perpetual state of readiness, Dre and M's dynamic was established in their first session and was pivotal to much of M's finest work.
I had this sample ready because I thought it was something that he would sound good on. Well, I pushed play on the drum machine and he just immediately started with the, "Hi, my name is," bam, that was it. And we recorded 4 songs that first night and 3 of them went on his first album.
Just in that one session, the two made records that were more seminal than anything Rick and M concocted together. While Dre is precise to the most painful degree, Rubin is hands-off, and has even stated that his dream scenario is to produce an artist's best record without even needing to interact with them in person. In fact, most of the footage that you can see of him in the studio mainly features him lying on the couch. Given this kind of creative freedom as opposed to guidelines like those provided by Dre, Eminem was left to his own devices, and here, we arguably saw the birth of M's rapidy rap era. Meanwhile, as M has said before, Dre's eagerness to switch things up always forced him to stay on his toes.
I think Dre's process has gotten a little different. Dre's kind of up for trying new things more so than I am. I kind of try to stick to the same formula. Dre's always updating how he does his beats, how he records. I still use a booth because to me there's nothing like that in the intimacy of you and just the microphone. But I do know that he's recorded some things where he's got the mic set up in the room where the mixing board is and don't even have a booth. Other than that, our relationship hasn't changed, our recording process hasn't changed.
This is a major reason why Rick Rubin's approach doesn't work for everyone, including Eminem. Where Dre is on hand for every point of the process, Rubin is closer to a DJ Khaled or Diddy in the sense that he doesn't actually construct any of the music, instead curating its direction but with a much higher degree of care. Passive-aggressively thanked by Muse for teaching them how not to produce, and called more of a hindrance than a help by Red Hot Chili Peppers' Josh Klinghoffer, the fact that you're essentially paying for his educated ear doesn't work for everyone, and as a result, his guru status has rubbed some people the wrong way, not least of all Slipknot's Corey Taylor.
Rick Rubin showed up for 45 minutes a week. Rick Rubin would then lay on a couch, have a mic brought in next to his face so he wouldn't have to move, and then he would be like, "Play it for me." And he had shades on the whole time. He would stroke his huge beard and try and get as much of the food out of it as he could. Play it again. Stop. Do that over. I respect what Rick Rubin has done, but the Rick Rubin of today is a thin shadow of the Rick Rubin that he was.
While Corey Taylor learned that Rick Rubin's methodology wasn't for him, Eminem stubbornly doubled down. Likely inspired by the respect that he has for Rubin's legacy, there's every chance that Shady saw him as the only man outside of Dre that could help him deliver a classic. But as we all know, the second time around, the results of Rick Rubin as executive producer were even worse, with the duo choosing to up the pop sound and inadvertently turn in M's most clowned album of all time with Revival. In the lead up to the album's release, M revealed Rick Rubin produced 3 or 4 songs on Revival and had apparently worked on a lot of the album, while Dr. Dre had only mixed a couple of songs. But by the time that the album emerged, fans sincerely wished that things were the other way around. Where Dre would have likely pushed M out of his comfort zone and made him explore the new world of hip-hop head-on, Rubin seemed to feed into his grievances, giving M ideas that he had to deviate from what was popular in the genre. For him, mumble rap is a little bit of a culture shock because there's a new wave of hip-hop that's not really what he's about, Rubin said ahead of its release. So he was just talking to me about how that felt. I could see he was frustrated by it. He's fanatical to a point I don't think I've ever seen before in anyone, just to his attention to detail. He has a perfect memory of everything about the music and he gets inside of it and writes whatever's good or bad about it. He wants the rhythm of the words to bounce off of the beat in a particular way. With Rubin once again overseeing several tracks on the production side of things, the reviews were less than kind in terms of the beats that he'd assigned to Shady. In Pitchfork's case, they wrote that while the production as a whole was uninspiring, Rubin's contributions are particularly embarrassing. His rehash of hits from the Rush, Def Jam days, Heat, and Remind Me suggest he's completely out of ideas. Meanwhile, in a particularly scathing review, Consequence of Sound wrote that Rubin being secure in his own bubble meant that he had aided and abetted M making a record that sounds seriously out of touch. The production here is absolutely awful. That someone this removed from the landscape needs someone more in tune than Rick Rubin to sample the Cranberries Zombie artlessly on In My Head, or lay a bad impression of Ryan Lewis's piano beneath Walk on Water. Suddenly faced with more critical backlash than ever before, it seems like M's need to pay homage to the past and Rick's willingness to co-sign his own antiquated viewpoint on what modern hip-hop should sound like meant that M overlooked the flaws in Rubin's approach. Thankfully, it seemed like Revival may have been the final sign that Shady needed to end the partnership once and for all, as the two haven't worked together since. Ultimately, Rick and Eminem clearly went into collaborating together with the best of intentions, but were guilty of appealing to each other's worst traits as producer and rapper alike.